Hi, everybody. So this is our last PowerPoint presentation for the entire semester. So last time we started talking about the endocrine system as an example of an organ system in the human body. And we're going to continue that discussion. And the part of the endocrine system we have left to talk about is the reproductive endocrine glands. And so that's what we're going to cover today. Excuse me. So the hormones the reproductive hormones of the endocrine system are controlled by the pituitary gland, just like we talked about other ones like the thyroid hormone and adrenal gland are controlled by the pituitary. And there are two hormones made in the pituitary that function to stimulate the testes and the ovaries. And those hormones are FSH and LH. Their long names are both named for their function in females. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone and LH luteinizing hormone. But the exact two hormones exist in both males and females. It's just in females, they act on the ovary, and in males, they act on the testes. And so they are responsible for the growth of the gonads. And again, the gonads, excuse me, are the testes in males and the ovaries in females. And the testes and the ovaries produce the steroid hormones, which are primarily testosterone in males and estrogen and progesterone in females. So the pituitary stimulates the testes and ovaries to produce the steroid hormones. The FSH and LH are also involved in stimulating the production of the gametes in the ovary and in the testes. So that would be sperm and egg cells, which are produced in the gonads. The sex steroids, the estrogens, progesterone, and testosterone that are released by the gonads are what are responsible for developing secondary sex characteristics. So that is body differences between males and females, such as hair and fat distribution, skin glands, height, and various other characteristics that are the effect of the sex steroid hormones. First, we're going to talk about the male reproductive system. This slide is a little busy, but FSH, let me go back to it, is the one of the hormones that's released by the pituitary gland, and it travels to the testes, and in the testes it stimulates meiosis in primary spermatocytes. So that means it stimulates sperm production. So the effect of FSH is to increase sperm production. So males would begin producing FSH in puberty, and it would stimulate spermatocytes, which is like the immature, the non-functioning sperm yet, to go through meiosis and make the haploid sperm. So FSH is for sperm production. The other hormone from the pituitary gland, LH, stimulates the testes to make testosterone. So FSH is sperm production, LH is testosterone. I'm not going to write the whole word. And so those are produced in response to those two hormones from the pituitary gland. And then there's feedback inhibition to cut down on those production when testosterone is produced, etc., so that there is inhibition when enough of the products are made, like we've already talked about. In females, the FSH, again, it's the same hormone in both males and females. So in females, the FSH and LH are released by the pituitary. They go to the ovaries, which kind of looks like a chicken leg in this picture. And in the ovary, they stimulate production of estrogen. And estrogen is the primary hormone involved in development of secondary sexual characteristics in females, breast enlargement, fat deposition, etc. And also involved with development of the egg that's going to be released during ovulation. So that's the FSH and LH effect in females. So we're going to go through a little bit of the characteristics of the male reproductive system and kind of what happens in different sites. These are the primary components of the male reproductive system. The testes, which is the gonad, and the gonad is the reproductive organ. And so the testes kind of has two functions. One is it produces sperm, and the second is it produces testosterone. I'm going to go to the picture then to describe these. So the testes are suspended outside of the abdominal cavity. So they're not in the abdominal cavity. The descent of the testes out of the abdominal cavity happens during embryological development. There are sometimes cases where a male child baby's born with undescended testes, and that can be corrected surgically. Otherwise, undescended testes are associated with increased problems with sterility and increased risk of testicular cancer. So after sperm are produced in the testes, we'll talk more about that in a minute, they're stored in another structure called the epididymis, which I always have trouble saying. And that kind of serves as the storage spot of sperm. And then from the epididymis, they can travel through the vas deferens, which is also sometimes called the duct. And as the sperm and fluid travels through there, there's a couple glands that add components, the prostate gland. I'm not going to go through that in detail. A couple other glands that add the fluid and other components to the fluid containing the sperm. It travels through, excuse me, and it enters into the penis. And in males, the duct for release of sperm also is the same duct that is used for release of urine. So this is the bladder in males, and where urine is produced and goes down, and then this is the tube coming from the testicles where sperm are. And so there are the ability to close one of those pathways at any one time. So that's the basic components of the male reproductive system. So the testes is the gonad. And as I said, the testes have two functions. One is production of sperm, and then the other is production of testosterone. So if you look inside a testes, there is composed of these series of tubes. So this is just one tube that's called a seminiferous tubule. And the seminiferous tubule is the site of sperm production. So this is one tubule, a cross section of one seminiferous tubule. And at the edges of the seminiferous tubule are the stem cells that are used to make sperm. They're diploid, and under the influence of FSH, they begin to go through meiosis. And as they go through meiosis, they move forward. I'm going to change to red. I think you can see it a little bit better. They move forward and they reach the lumen part of the tube. They now have completed meiosis and are called spermatocytes. They're still not mature functioning sperm. They have to go through some other developmental changes to get the typical shape of sperm with a head. The head is where the nucleus is. So that is, remember, sperm are haploid, so it has 23 chromosomes. Sperm have a lot of mitochondria, which enables them to give the energy, the ATP that's needed for swimming. And then at the tip of the sperm are special chemicals that enable the sperm to attach to the egg cell and dissolve kind of the coating around the egg cell. And the tail is a flagella that is used in swimming. So once a male reaches maturity, spermatogenesis, which is the production of sperm, happens all the time until death, and sperm are made constantly by the millions and can be stored in the epididymis. If you have a vasectomy, is when you cut that vas ductus, which is the tube that the sperm travels in, so that ligation of that tube prevents sperm from leaving the body. The other functional cells in the testes, besides the seminiferous tubules, are the interstitial cells, which are also called Leydig cells, and they're the ones that produce testosterone. So both testosterone and sperm are made in the testes, but they're made in different parts of the testes. So it's not like one cell one day is making sperm and another day it's making testosterone. They're made in different parts of the testes. And so, as I said, the stem cells for making sperm are in the edger part of a tubule, and they go through meiosis, meiosis 1, meiosis 2, and when they finish that, you get 4 haploid sperm cells, which then mature into functioning sperm cells. And this is a picture of one seminiferous tubule, and you can kind of see the sperm forming here, and as the cells go through meiosis. Okay, so that's production of testosterone and sperm in the male reproductive system. We're going to talk a little bit now about the female reproductive system. And so the components of the female reproductive system, the gonad is the ovary. So the ovary is where eggs are produced. The technical name for eggs, which is a weird word, is called oocytes with 2 O's. So those are the eggs. They're produced by, oh, you're back, Dart? Meiosis. And in the ovary, let me go to the picture. So this is the ovary is here. And so that's the site of oogenesis, which is the production of egg cells by the ovary. And then during ovulation, the egg is released from the ovary. It travels into the fallopian tube, which is called the oviduct. But it travels into the fallopian tube to the uterus. And if fertilization has occurred, the fertilized egg would implant in the uterus. Otherwise, it would be released with menstrual flow through the cervix and the vagina. So that's the basic structure of the female reproductive system. The production of eggs in the ovary in mammals, of which we are a mammal, is quite different than sperm production. So sperm production happens continuously from puberty through adulthood in a male, whereas egg production in females is quite different in that the eggs in the ovary begin to go through meiosis during embryological development. So during fetal development, the stem cells for producing eggs enter into meiosis and suspend in meiosis 1. So they go into meiosis and then it stops partway through meiosis 1. And it stays suspended until puberty, and then every menstrual cycle, one of those eggs that are usually just one that are suspended in meiosis 1 continues and completes meiosis 1 and enters meiosis 2. So it is true that females are born with all their eggs that they're ever going to have. They're not constantly making new eggs. And the eggs that they have started meiosis 1 and they are suspended in meiosis 2. After a female goes through puberty and through the influence of estrogen and progesterone, one of those suspended eggs will complete meiosis 1 and enter into meiosis 2. The egg never completes meiosis 2 unless it's fertilized. So eggs only finish their complete meiosis 2 to get a functional egg if it has been fertilized. And if you remember, when we talked about meiosis, that you don't get 4 haploid cells, you only get 1 in eggs. The other ones aren't functional egg cells, they're kind of supporting cells. So the hormones produced in the ovary are estrogens and progesterone, and they are released under the influence of LH and FSH. And LH and FSH cause ovulation to occur. I'm going to show you some pictures through the process. So here would be a cross section of an ovary, and so here's the ovary here, fallopian tube. So in the ovary, when a female reaches puberty, there are primary follicles, which are eggs that are in meiosis 1 and suspended there. And eggs usually have other cells surrounding them, so there's like this halo of cells. So this little one in the center is actually the oocyte, and then these are supporting follicle cells. So every menstrual cycle, at the beginning, one of these primary follicles, sometimes it could be more than one, but usually just one, under the influence of FSH and LH, stimulating estrogen, one of those follicles will begin to mature. It will complete meiosis 1, it will grow, and it will enter into meiosis 2. Then during ovulation, which occurs about midway through the cycle, the egg and some of those supporting cells is released from the ovary. That's ovulation. It still has not completed meiosis 2. It's still in meiosis 2. The rest of the follicle, this remaining part here, becomes what's called the corpus luteum. And those are Latin. Corpus means body, and luteum means yellow because it kind of has this yellow appearance. And the corpus luteum produces progesterone. And what that progesterone does is that it's a hormone, it's released into the blood, and it prepares the uterus for implantation of an egg. So it causes thickening of the uterine wall, increased blood flow to the uterus. And so that's, if this egg that was ovulated is fertilized, the progesterone ensures that by the time the egg gets to the uterus to implant, that the uterus would be ready for the implanted egg. Oops. If fertilization does not occur, then the unfertilized egg does not implant, and the corpus luteum begins to degenerate, and that would signal the menses. This is the words. I'm going to go to the picture. It's easier to describe it there. So this is what we just talked about in the ovary. So under the influence of FSH and LH, coming from the pituitary gland, you get development of one of the follicles into a mature egg. At ovulation, that egg is released. Then the corpus luteum, which is the remnants of the follicle, produce progesterone. So if you look here, the estrogen levels peak just prior to ovulation, and then the progesterone levels peak after ovulation because it's primarily produced by the corpus luteum. If you look at the uterine wall here, the uterine wall, under the influence of that progesterone, increases in thickness and blood flow, preparing for implantation of a fertilized egg. If that does not happen, the corpus luteum degenerates and the thickening of the uterine wall decreases, and then this extra material cells and blood are released in menstrual flow. And so that begins, the first part of the new cycle begins actually with day 1 of menses. The average cycle is 28 days, but there's great variability in the length of the cycle. Fertilization and implantation. So the fertilized egg is released from, the egg is released from the ovary, and fertilization can take place. It actually happens in the fallopian tube. It travels then down the fallopian tube to the uterus, and it implants in the uterus. If it implants in the uterus, you start making another hormone called HCG, which stands for human chorionic gonadotropin, and that will go back and keep the progesterone being made by the corpus luteum. So that is only produced if fertilization and implantation occurs. And that's the actual hormone that is detected in pregnancy tests. And so when you have a positive pregnancy test, is because you're producing HCG, and that is an indication that fertilization has occurred and the egg has implanted in the uterine wall. This is a picture of this little blue line here is the sperm, and then the red is an egg. So you can see how much bigger the egg is than the sperm. And that's probably why women only make 1 egg instead of 4, because it's a much more resource investment to produce an egg than it is to produce a sperm. So this just shows, so here we have the ovary, and it's producing the egg, and it's released from the ovary during ovulation, and it's partway through meiosis when it's released. And when it's released, it travels into the fallopian tube. And these are not connected. There's actually space. These fimbriae are like fingers kind of surrounding, but there is actually space. And so sometimes the egg doesn't get into the fallopian tube properly. But fertilization actually occurs in the fallopian tube. So the fertilization does not occur in the uterus, so that the sperm have to travel up through the vagina, through the uterus, and into the fallopian tube, where it would encounter the egg released from the ovary. So fertilization is happening here. And then the fertilized egg finishes meiosis too. and it begins dividing. And it takes it about a week to get all the way down the fallopian tube and into the uterus. So by the time it reaches the uterus, it's already gone through several rounds of division, and it's now like a ball of cells. And then it implants in the uterine wall, and that's where it stays until delivery of the baby. I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk about. If in cases where women take fertility drugs, what the fertility drugs actually are FSH and LH, and what they do, because they stimulate ovulation, they cause more than one egg to be released during ovulation. So if you have 6 eggs being released at ovulation, the chances of one of those being fertilized is much greater than is 6 times greater than just 1 egg. So that's how they increase the likelihood of pregnancy, because there's just many more eggs there. For in vitro fertilization, these drugs are also used to get more than one egg developing, and then the eggs, when they're ready to be fertilized, are gone in and surgically removed from the ovary, and then fertilization occurs in vitro, which means outside of the body in like a test tube, and then fertilized eggs can be inserted back into the uterus for implantation. Okay, so that's the last slide of your Bio 156. So there will be a quiz on this, and then exam 5 would be coming up following this. Bye-bye.